The committee will come to order. This hearing is fully virtual, so we need to address a few housekeeping matters. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. For the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition. If I notice when you are recognized that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. We will begin with the chair and ranking member, then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. We are using the 5-minute clock, which we will adhere to strictly today, which you will notice on your screen. It will show how much time is remaining. If there is a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time in fairness. Finally, in regard to adding extraneous or additional material to the record, per House rules, we've set up an email address where members can send anything they wish to submit for the record after seeking recognition for its inclusion. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. I would like to welcome the Acting Executive Director of the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights, Teresa James, and General Counsel of the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights, John Ullman, to present the fiscal year 2023 budget request. The Office of Congressional Workplace Rights is responsible for administering the Congressional Accountability Act for the approximately 30,000 employees in the legislative branch. The mission of the office is to continue assisting the legislative branch community in creating and maintaining a workplace that is safe, accessible, and free from discrimination and other unlawful employment practices. In the last year, your office has worked on education initiatives for the House workforce, including members. In addition to implementing cybersecurity improvements, necessary IT systems, and network upgrades in line with government-wide security standards. You're also working towards full migration of a risk-based management suite. The upgrades you made in the last year were important factors to ensuring that staff courses on preventing discrimination and harassment, including sexual harassment in the workplace, could be more widely available and managed within the House network. I'm encouraged that OCWR continues to work on modernization and look forward to hearing your comments on your request. OCWR fiscal year 2023 budget request of $7.5 million is flat with the fiscal year 2022 enacted total and includes an additional full-time employee, full-time equivalent. While 70% of your budget goes towards pay and benefits for these employees, you are also enhancing several of your programs. I look forward to your testimony today. And at this point, I would like to yield to my colleague, the distinguished lady from Washington State and ranking member, Jamie Herrera Butler, for any opening comments that you would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Ms. James. The Office of Congressional Workplace Rights fiscal 2023 request is $7.5 million, which is the same as your 22 enacted level, which I don't think we've seen that yet. OCWR is an independent, nonpartisan office that ensures that the congressional workplace is safe, free from discrimination, and accessible to the public. And in addition to your regular work in administering the Congressional Accountability Act, your office has also recently been engaged in discussions regarding staff unionization. Over 25 years ago, OCWR drafted regulations on how staffers could unionize, and then this year, you dusted off that language and confirmed that the regulations as drafted would still effectively create the legal framework necessary for congressional staff to unionize. And as a former congressional staffer, I understand the very unique working situation that staff here face. But I do have several concerns on how this effort is being considered and questions on how it would be implemented. This has also implications that relate directly to your office as the topic presents a resources issue when you're asked to provide briefings, provide certification approval for petitions and other support to ensure unionization efforts are done properly. And, and I am curious, excuse me, to hear your thoughts on that matter. I appreciate you and the work of your team, your staff to protect the rights of the 30,000 employees on Capitol Hill to assure access for persons with disabilities and educating our constituency on the Congressional Accountability Act mandate. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Without objection, your written testimony will be made part of the record. Executive Director James, please summarize your statement for the members of the committee. Once you have finished your statement, we will move to the question and answer period. Please begin. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Ryan and Ranking Member Herrera Butler and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of the Office of Congressional Workplace Rights, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss with you our budget request and justification for fiscal year 2023 and our progress on our ongoing mission to advance workplace rights, safety and health, and accessibility in the legislative branch. The OCWR is one of the smallest organizations of its kind, yet its mandate to apply 14 workplace and accessibility laws to the legislative branch is extremely broad. The OCWR manages an administrative dispute resolution program to resolve workplace claims arising under the CAA. We investigate, enforce, and resolve matters concerning safety and health, public access, and labor management laws applied to the legislative branch. We provide a program of education and outreach concerning workplace rights and responsibilities, and we advise Congress on whether provisions of law relating to employment should be made applicable to the legislative branch. To perform this mandate, the OCWR is requesting to remain at the fiscal FY22 funding level of $7.5 million, with $2 million remaining available until September 2024. The OCWR is also requesting one additional FTE for fiscal year 2023 to manage the office's program required by the Reform Act to permanently retain records of investigations, hearings, and other matters, and to administer the office's records management function and perform other related duties as assigned. This year marks the 26th year or the anniversary of the passage of the Congressional Accountability Act and the second full year implementing the provisions of the CAA Reform Act. Most of our experience operating under these new reforms was acquired while working remotely as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet we've been able to adapt and meet these challenges. Confidential advising, case adjudication, and mediation under our administrative dispute resolution program continues in a virtual environment. We continue to provide training and education resources to employees on the Hill and throughout the country via our new website and video conferencing platforms, such as Zoom for Government. Our training and education materials are directed to the entire congressional workforce, from members of Congress and senior staff to entry-level employees. They focus on underlying practices and behaviors that can lead to discrimination and create a hostile work environment. And they can be tailored to the needs of specific workplaces and groups of employees. In addition to these resources, our Office of General Counsel regularly conducts brown bag lunch seminars for the legislative branch community on current legal developments. Moreover, safety and health and accessibility inspections also continue, and where our inspectors need to be in the physical workplace, they follow guidelines issued by the Office of the Attending Physician and the CDC. In addition to these responsibilities, we are in the process of administering our second annual workplace climate survey for the legislative branch, as is required by the Reform Act. Our office also has taken action to implement new laws under the CAA, such as the new provisions of the Family Medical Leave Act that grant paid parental leave to legislative branch employees, and the Fair Chance to Compete Act, which places on employing offices' ability to request criminal history information from job applicants prior to extending a conditional offer of employment. Although implementing the Reform Act began in FY 2019, many initiatives will require ongoing funding in FY 2023 and beyond. For example, the OCWR's secure e-filing system requires continued cybersecurity upgrades and design modifications to assure information security and confidentiality. Online training and educational models must be developed and continually updated to reflect changes in the law. And the legislative branch climate survey will require ongoing funding to administer every 2 years as mandated by the Reform Act. In sum, our FY 2023 budget request focuses on supporting the OCWR's statutory functions and assuring the services to the congressional community. Additionally, funding will be supported on anticipated increases associated with continued implementation and administration of changes set forth in the Reform Act. I thank the members of the subcommittee for their unwavering support for the critical work that we do and the privilege of your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We're going to jump right into the question and answers. And I know that you provide a program of education and training for members of Congress and the legislative branch staff. And the request that you have here includes $260,000 for non-personnel services for the education and outreach program. And we would like to understand a little bit better how you are utilizing your funding to adapt the training to the changes within the House work environment over the last couple of years. How have you adapted the training to support a hybrid work environment through the pandemic? Do you feel more people have used the or attended the training using the online model? And I'll let you answer those. And
Okay, thank you.
go ahead.
We have always trained on the provisions of the Congressional Accountability Act, but it wasn't mandated before the Reform Act. So now we're able to provide training on the Congressional Accountability Act, on the process to resolve claims, on the protections that are provided to staff. However, we also understand that the House has its own mandated training. And so that is not something that we provide, but that is something that we could provide. We also do train other instrumentalities on Capitol Hill regarding their workplace rights and protections under the Congressional Accountability Act. And so we modify our training as needed. Some of the training not only includes the Congressional Accountability Act and those provisions, but we have training on implicit bias. And we recently developed a video, which I believe the House is now sharing on its website, which is fabulous. But that's something that we developed last year. We also provide training on bystander intervention. So in other words, if you see something, say something, it's ways to constructively intervene, to distract someone, to provide supportive behavior, to report an incident if you see one. Civility and inclusion, we also train on that, and on racial equity and how to prevent discrimination and harassment in the workforce. And we continue to develop training. We're working on a module right now on ageism. So, we look at what the substantive provisions of the Act are and develop training that speaks to and supports those rules and regulations.
When it comes to the bystander intervention, does the training give the employees the examples that basically coach you up on how to intervene? Is that part of it?
Yeah, basically it says, if you see something, if there's something going on in your office and you know that it's inappropriate, you can support someone, you can intervene. If you see something, you can tell your supervisor, hey, I'm seeing something that's happening over here and I think you need to say something to someone. So it really is, designed to help people without creating more conflict in the workplace, to effectively intervene.
And I'm assuming there's a nuance in the training for a supervisor versus non-supervisor. Is that true?
Right. I mean, we want to encourage staff to not, if they see a situation that could be very problematic, maybe they don't want to get involved and they should go to the supervisor, and the supervisor has the authority to intervene.
In the GAO, switching gears here a bit real quick, the GAO found weaknesses in the project planning oversight system and cybersecurity risk management. Back in February 2020, they made 5 recommendations to OCWR to address these weaknesses. But as far as I know, there hasn't been any, they haven't been fully addressed. So what's the status of your response to the recommendations from the GAO? How do you plan to apply the funding that you requested today? for this year toward implementing these recommendations? And what would the cost be to fully implement their recommendations?
So we have been working with the Library of Congress and other service providers to ensure that we have addressed all of the issues. I believe we've got a little more time. We are working toward making sure that the systems are as fully safe as possible. And, you know, I'm unfortunately, I lack a certain IT expertise here, but it's something that we've been taking very seriously, and we've been working with our service providers to ensure that all the information is fully protected.
And do you know the cost to fully implement?
I
If
do
not, you can, yeah, if you could get it to us.
We'll do that.
Okay. Great. Distinguished gentleman from Washington State, Ms. Herrera Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On, let's see, I'm going to start with well, maybe the shorter one first. Ms. James, last year, OCWR's biannual report to Congress was released and contains about a half a dozen recommendations to update the Congressional Accountability Act. Some recommendations include whistleblower protections, providing subpoena authority to aid in trafficking, safety, and health investigations, and improving the board's FMLA regulations once they're resubmitted. What processes have been made in the last year toward these recommendations, and what would it take to fully implement all of your recommendations?
Well, I think some of it requires some action on Congress's part. Our board is able to adopt regulations, but Congress has to pass them for them to become effective. And so the 102B report, the board, you know, sends every 2 years saying these are our priorities, and this is what we're hoping the Congress is able to move forward for us.
Okay, thank you. Switching over to the issue of unionization, until the OCWR recently reviewed the regulations, for almost 30 years, the proposed unionization regulations hadn't been debated. Researched or even seriously thought about on Capitol Hill, allowing congressional staff to unionize potentially, in my mind, creates numerous conflicts of interest, and I think would definitely have an impact on a member's constitutional responsibilities in terms of influencing how a member makes decisions about policy. This, I think, needs to be carefully thought out before putting anything into action. And so a couple of things. During OCWR's recent review of the regulations, did your team give any thought to the potential conflicts of interest congressional unions could create? And if so, what potential conflicts did your team consider? And then with these potential conflicts in mind, does OCWR plan to develop guidance on the organization and management of unions in the House of Representatives?
So yes, we have guidance, and it's available on our website at ocwr.gov. There are frequently asked questions and other information. We do know that the process would be very complex because of the nature of Capitol Hill. We also understand that, you know, the implementation is going to be something that, as members, you know, need to run for office every 2 years, that it creates additional issues. We have with us John Ullman, who is our general counsel and who deals directly with some of these issues. I don't know, John, do you want to step in here?
Well, the only thing I would add is that, you know, the regulations which are developed and passed by the board, they're largely procedural, and so they have procedures in place. The big question for them, whether there were procedures in place that could address the issues that you're talking about. And so they were satisfied that the regulations that were proposed back in '96 do have those regulations. So essentially the procedures.
Let me cut in there. The board felt like the regulations that were developed in 1997 would address the conflicts of interest. How is that possible, considering, like, you know, there's the whole media world that has changed in that amount of time in terms of communication online and with constituents? The board felt like the regulations were adequately addressing all that.
I think what you're misunderstanding. The regulations, the question for them is whether the procedures were adequate. Those questions are raised in individual proceedings. In other words, if somebody believes there's a conflict of interest, having somebody represented, they can raise that then in a representation petition. So the question for the board was whether the procedures in place would be adequate to address questions that were raised in particular organizing efforts.
All right. Well, I don't know that I don't see a timer up, Mr. Chairman, so I don't know how much time I have or if I'm done. But I would say, Mr. Ullman, and maybe Ms. James, that those are things I didn't understand the answer to that question completely. And if it's hard for me to understand, I would guess that it would be hard for, it is not clear to me even what the answer was there. So in terms of addressing this and numerous other questions, I think maybe I don't know if frequently asked questions on the website is going to do it. I would maybe prefer to have a little bit more detail from you on this to see if you could address those things, or if there's more stuff that needs to be done regulatory wise or in law. That's essentially what I'm getting at. So with that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, appreciate it. We always want to ensure rights. I think we need to look to the House Administration Committee too and seek their guidance as to what the next steps are going to be. Next is the distinguished gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director James, for joining us. I wanted to go back to the Congressional Climate Survey that you mentioned in your opening remarks. And I wondered, as you are working on the second biennial survey, were there any findings or trends that you were able to discern from the first survey completed in FY21? And how have those findings informed your work to advance workforce rights and protections?
Thank you. The climate survey was quite a lift. The results, fortunately, were very positive. I think that, we were happy to find that most staffers feel very comfortable in their workplace environment. We are able to take the information and utilize that as we develop training. We will be shortly rolling out the next climate survey. We are required to do this every 2 years. So it'll be coming out shortly again for staff, and we encourage them to take the survey because the more information that we can gather, the more significant the data is. So
what sort of actions are you taking to increase awareness about the survey?
So when the survey goes out, staff get repeated messages through their email, and this is all confidential. We don't know, everything has been taken care of sort of electronically, where nobody knows exactly who's connecting certain results with what individual. So that's why they get repeated messages saying, take the survey, take the survey. We have information up on our website about the survey. We'll put it out with our newsletter saying, take the survey, because obviously the more people who take it, the more reliable the information is. And so, like I said, it should be going out shortly. We're still working with our oversight committee on a couple of things, and then this will be going out.
Great. Speaking of promoting awareness, you mentioned the paid parental leave law, the Federal Employee Paid Leave Act, signed into law in 2019. Where are you in the process of amending your existing regulations to address these new provisions?
So we have proposed new regulations. As far as we're concerned, the provision is applicable regardless of, the status of the regulations. Yeah. It's important, and we put out again with our newsletters and other informational materials that this is available for staff.
And I noted that in your budget request, you said you're doing presentations on the topic of paid parental leave to help ensure legislative community knows their rights. Are there additional ways that you are ensuring staff and offices understand this new law?
Well, the information is available on our website. We include it in our training. So we do have trainers who have been currently, for I guess the last 2 years actually, have been training via, Zoom just to reach the different staff while everybody's been working remotely. But they cover that sort of information in their training as well.
great. One thing that I'm hearing anecdotally is reports that staffers do not often see the official complaint process for discrimination or harassment as an option. They think they have doubts that the process will be worth the result. And so what would you say? I know you've done a lot of work on this area. What would you say to a staffer who is hesitant to engage with the grievance process?
I would suggest that anyone who has a concern about their workplace issues, if they don't feel comfortable approaching their supervisor to say, hey, something's going on, that they can always call our office and speak to our confidential advisor. The confidential advisor can give them information about how the CA applies to their issue and give them information on the process, but they can also talk with them through ways that matters might be resolved without having to go through a complaint process. If the employee feels as though they're not able to resolve it on their own, they can certainly go through our process. Employees of the House are represented by the Office of House Advocacy. So there are different offices in the House that can also assist staff. We serve the broad legislative branch staff. So including House, we have Senate, Library of Congress, Capitol Police, and others. But we do have a process that is very friendly to staff to make sure that they understand how to use it. Mediation is an option under our process. It used to be mandatory. Our board recommends that parties take advantage of the mediation process. And a value to that is that an issue can be resolved by agreement between the parties without the employee having to take their case to court or to a hearing process and prove that they are a victim of some kind of discrimination or that their FMLA rights have been violated. So it's an opportunity for parties to say, hey, this is a less than ideal situation that we're in, but we think that we can resolve this by an agreement between us. And so I think the mediation process really needs to be reexamined as a way for people to promptly resolve their issues.
I see that I am out of time. Thank you, Director James. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The distinguished gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amadei.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Since you were so complimentary about the last questioning thing, I'm going to yield back, except I want to compare your score on this year's training test with mine to see which one of us scored better on the test. Other than that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from distinguished gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to get into you guys' contests. It sounds pretty difficult. Ms. James, so I'm just trying to understand the budget request. It's a level budget request, right?
Right.
Pardon?
Yes.
Okay. No increase, but you do talk here about, in your testimony, I think it was about increasing 70% reflects personnel costs, including increased compensation and benefits associated with additional staff hired. So I guess that implies to me that you're allocating more of a level budget over on the personnel side for those increases and thus reducing it somewhere else.
Well, we are asking to maintain $2 million to roll over to the next year. We have one FTE open that we would like to fill. So part of it is personnel issues. The other thing is we don't control the number of claims that come to our office or the issues related to investigations that are conducted. So we can't always control the expenditures. So if we have people who go to hearing and hearings can be very lengthy, then we may end up needing to have more money available to conduct hearings. Or, as we saw with the January 6th event, we needed money available to be able to, investigate and take a look at any OSHA violations. So within our limited budget, as you see, our budget is relative to many other budgets, rather minor, and we do the most with what we have. But we do find ourselves in a situation where we may need money that can roll over to the next year.
Okay, maybe I'm getting myself confused. So what exactly is that $2 million? Because if you have a level budget, I'm just kind of going back to my question. If you have a level budget, And your FTEs are staying level as well, or you're increasing by, you want to increase by 1 FTE?
Right, we want to increase by 1 FTE.
So where are you paying for your increased staffing from? If your budget is level, what is this $2 million carryover? Is that where it's coming from?
Contractors. So in other words, when our cases go up, cases now go through 2 hearing processes, a preliminary hearing review and then a merits hearing. So under the new process, it has gotten a little bit more complicated and a lot more expensive. So we don't know if we'll have 30 cases this year or 60 cases this year. We don't know what will come out of the general counsel's investigations. We don't know what kind of support he may need if there are any significant issues that occur on Capitol Hill.
Is that 2 million part of the 7.5 million?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that explains it to me. All right, sorry about that. I mean, I guess the question then is, why aren't your FTEs going up? I mean, you seem to have an increased workload. You are being asked to do more. And we see other parts of the ledge branch asking for increases in the FTE count. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't. I'm just asking the question of why you're not going up. Do you just have capacity there already, or you've decided you're going to make do with the FTEs that you have, or the contractors give you some flexibility in terms of stable FTEs?
So the contractors give us some flexibility. We also have staff that work very hard because they wear many hats, and we know that FTEs are hard to come by. So, we would love to have 5 more, but we figure, 1 more at least is getting us closer to, a manageable situation. But yes, again, we don't know what any coming year is going to bring, especially as we saw last year. So
I mean, is there any one part of your responsibilities, like one area of concern that you just see ramping up faster than you expected, or you're projecting it to go up faster because of external conditions, or whatever the case might be? Is there any one area that we should kind of be watching for real pressure on your budget?
The only thing that probably would be the strongest pressure on our budget would be the labor management issues. If we had to quickly pick up and bring on people and conduct, elections, in hundreds of offices, that might be quite intense.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Next is the distinguished gentleman from the state of Washington, Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Ms. James. Thanks for being with us today. Appreciate that. Just had a couple of questions. I'm sure everybody, we got a copy of your fiscal year 23 budget request. I'm sure everybody on the committee did. However, just a quick search at your website, we couldn't find a similar copy of your request for fiscal year 23 or any prior years either. So just curious, for the sake of transparency, would you think it's important to provide that kind of a budget request on your website?
We could certainly do that. There isn't anything, any reason why it's not up there. We have redone our website. We've just redone it recently. So we're still finding where things can be improved. And we'd be happy to put that information on the website.
Okay, good. Just a silly little thing we noticed that might be helpful. So I believe it was December of 2019, the GAO in their work did a study on your agency's management practices. I'm sure you're much too familiar with that. The agency, I understand that you implemented several of their recommendations. And one of them was that the OCWR identify desired performance results, develop performance measures, and report progress toward those results. Your budget request states that you're in the process of finalizing a strategic plan for the years 2021 through 2026. So you're still finalizing that strategic plan, which will include those measurable performance metrics. So 2 questions. How soon do you think the committee can expect to receive a copy of that report? And then how do you intend to implement changes and make those budget requests if you don't have that final strategic plan?
We do have a strategic plan, and we may be making some modifications to it, but we do have our 2021 through 2026 strategic plan. And that will, guide us in many things. And so we'll be reporting on the results of that. Also, I believe it won't be until summer that we have worked through some of these issues with respect to the findings that you reference.
So maybe I just misread that, but your budget request talks about the fact that you're in the process of finalizing that plan.
Right. So we hope to have the plan done soon, but it's not done yet.
Okay, and so when do you think we can get that report?
I would guess sometime in the next couple of months.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you again for being with us today. Appreciate what you do. And Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Newhouse. Yeah, we would be anxious to get that report as soon as we can. Distinguished gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. James, for joining us here today and for all that you're doing to keep our employees safe and content in their jobs. So I guess, one of the things I realized from these committees is the subcommittee is how a lot of us have the same questions. And for whatever reason, the gentlelady from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts always seems to ask the questions that I have before I come up and get my turn. But there is one question I would ask about the Congressional Climate Survey that's coming up. How do you decide what questions to put on there? And do you just recycle the same questions from the previous year, or do you base it on what's actually happening on the ground, or how do you decide what questions end up?
So we do work with our oversight committees, and there is some discussion about the questions and how best to ask the questions and what way is going to clarify what the question is that's being asked, so that we make sure that when we work with the contractor who has experience in conducting these kinds of surveys. So it's very important that we have a mixture of the experience that our contractor brings to the table and the experience that we have and our oversight committees have in understanding the environment here in the legislative branch.
So for example, this year, as the ranking member pointed out, there's an issue going on with the possibility of unionizing here. So is that something you would ask about in the Congressional Climate Survey, kind of to do a little straw poll, or just see if people have an interest in it, or if they feel benefited by that?
That may be something that, it hasn't been finalized yet. So it may be something that we'll be taking a look at as we work with our oversight committees on that issue. If there is some energy in that direction, then we would do so. Absolutely.
I just think it might be a good idea, just because it's a completely anonymous survey, and we could get a good idea of whether there's even an interest among the workforce to do so.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wexton. Next is the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Acting Director James and General Counsel Ullman. When Congress passed the Congressional Accountability Act in 1995, it put in motion a process for unionization of congressional staff. Currently, the House of Representatives is now actively considering legislation that would provide for House staff to unionize. And Speaker Pelosi has indicated her support, as well as Senator Schumer in the Senate. In recent oral testimony by Mr. Ullman before the House Administration Committee, he raised questions and concerns about insufficient funding for the OCWR in light of the unionization push. The influx of briefings, resources, and information around this topic would present a resources issue for the office. one that could be exacerbated by the large number of offices that could be unionized, and the current system for union approval relies on one person at the OCWR to certify petitions and oversee elections, the executive director of the OCWR. The OCWR has requested $7.5 million in budget for fiscal year 2023, which is identical to fiscal year 2022 and 21. In light of the ongoing unionization efforts, what additional funds would OCWR need to provide a smooth review and approval process for congressional unions to should a unionization resolution be approved by the House?
First, let me just say, and John, please feel free to weigh in here, but in the House, all the employing offices, each member is their own employing office. So at this point, until we know more, until we work and have some experience in this area, we don't know what it's going to look like on the House side. We know when we've done elections with Capitol Police and others, and they are one, unit of staff who are represented by the union. It would be very different in the House environment than what we are used to, or I think than what many are used to. John, did you want to add something here?
Well, that question was posed by CHA, and we did estimate that to do this expeditiously, because obviously these petitions would have to be moved through. You only have a 2-year term, and people who are unionizing. So we were looking at another 500,000 plus 2 FTEs to do this, and I think in the manner to. So if it was passed, that's what we would be seeking, I think, to expeditiously handle the petitions that would come through. So
you have a dollar amount in view already to handle this appropriately.
that's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Espaillat. I appreciate it. Just in the nick of time, they just called votes. So I want to thank the committee, the statutory functions of this office.
Trying to help you a little bit there.
You're doing good. You're doing good. The statutory functions of this office continue to be vital for the House community and their workplace protections. We appreciate all your service. Please tell your team how much we thank and appreciate them for their work largely behind the scenes to make this the kind of place that people want to work. So with that, thank you again for joining us, and the hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.